Welcome back. Here to talk to us about anti-Semitism and, of course, what we've been seeing recently in the news, as well as here in Michigan as it relates to Temple Beth. Carolyn Normandin is the regional director of the Michigan Anti-Defamation League. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to begin with Kanye West, his anti-Semitic rants, and it looks as if it is only increasing in the last couple of weeks, in the last couple of days. Just your reaction here from the Michigan standpoint.
So when something like the incident that happened with Kanye happened, we see a rise in anti-Semitism. Just the rhetoric that comes on, just the pushing the mannerisms, the talking points, that's problematic. And initially, when he started his rants, we saw a rise in anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred, and white supremacists started agreeing with him and pushing forward that narrative. So that was a problem. And then Nike and the Gap took measures and, disassociated themselves from him, which happens all the time. By the way, you can ask Michael Phelps or Lance Armstrong or Tiger Woods. When you start to not square with your brand identity, the brand sometimes says, okay, let's part ways. So that happened. And then we saw a renewed backlash because people blame Jews for Kanye's being losing his sponsorships. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he starts taking like a complete Holocaust denier to the former president's house for dinner. So that unleashed a whole series of, again, rhetoric that ignites and causes people to do incidents and take it out on Jewish community members. And that backlash, even though it starts on social media, it ends up having real world implications. And then, I don't know, the latest thing with Alex Jones, I have a feeling that this is just a really big bridge too far. Saying he's a friend of Hitler's and that Nazis were not that bad. I think this was just a rant that even the most far-right people could not square with.
How is the ADL taking all of this? You've always been the vanguard on the question of anti-Semitism. How is the ADL receiving all of this?
Thank you for asking. It's been hard. With every incident comes into our office, whether it comes into my office or any other ADL office around the country, we have to review facts. We spend time on it. We look at what has happened. If it's a social media problem, we try and work with digital companies. We could have an entire conversation about Twitter.
Yeah.
But mainly, social media companies do have vanguards against that. So we kind of do that. If it's an incident that's translated and has left social media and is translated into an act against a Jewish community member, we try and ameliorate the situation. If it happens in a school, that helps us. We can have more dialogue with students. But sometimes what's left is just a person who's been targeted because of somebody that they didn't know, ubiquitous star power, 30 million followers, and that translates into someone's Jewish star necklace being yanked off, or an overpass that's co-opted by, a virulent anti-Semite group saying Kanye was right, Jews, create all the ills of the world. And so these things have real world implications. So when that happens, ADL calls it out. We've been pretty vocal. We try and call out the behavior. We did call for, organizations that supported, like Adidas. Adidas was very, very clear when they made their decision to separate from their relationship with Kanye that they were doing it because of his anti-Semitism. And in fact, the head of North America, Adidas, came to the Never Is Now conference, which is a conference on anti-Semitism, and very clearly stated, this is not okay. And so what we do is act as boots on the ground for the average person where it's trickled down into their life. And then we do these sort of larger statements and try and give out information, things like this. It's really important for people to understand why what he said was wrong.
We're speaking with Carolyn Normandin here, Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League. And I want to get into the recent incident in Michigan here. Temple Beth And of course, in the interest of full disclosure, I have spoken at Temple Bethel during a Black Jewish Forum under my good friend, Rabbi Daniel Syme Emeritus. You know, we saw what happened at Temple Bethel. Does that shock you, or did you think what began as this litany of anti-Semitic rants would lead to the incident at Temple Bethel?
I'd like to say it would shock me. It doesn't. What we've seen in the last several years, but you know, recently in the last couple of weeks, this large uptick. So what's happened over the last several years is hatred has started to rise. It started to rise in around 2015, 2016. It's hatred against all communities, not just the Jewish community. So the Black community, the Asian community, the queer community, the Latin community. And what has happened is this sort of popularization or normalization. And when I say popular, it's become normalized or commonalized.
It becomes trendy on social media.
And it becomes trendy on social media, so then it becomes popular to just throw memes over the wall. So there's a problem there. So when you start to see that kind of rise, you start to see behaviors rise, just like we were talking about a second ago. So with the incident that happened at the Temple Bethel, which is a terrible, terrible incident, it happened with a school. It happened with young children and parents dropping off their children. Let me also connect that type of incident to incidents of bomb threats that have been happening across the country with the HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, and the Jewish community. So there's this heightened awareness. So then this person comes on to the campus. He started, you know, asking people, do they support Israel? When they said they did, he started cursing them out, virulent cursing. He was asked to leave. He did. Law enforcement was called. Law enforcement showed up. Other law enforcement intercepted and saw him, stopped him, and there was a traffic stop. But beyond that, immediately law enforcement started working behind the scenes. When I got the call from clergy members at Temple Bethel, immediately, what does ADL do? We take the incident, make sure we track it, analyze it. We contacted members of our Center on Extremism who looked at his digital footprint. FBI, I contacted members of our FBI field team here in Michigan. I know local Jewish communal security was working with local Bloomfield Hills law enforcement. So all these different pieces go into action, and there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. Law enforcement does not give a lot of information while they're in an active investigation. Half the time, I don't even know what's going on, but I do know when an incident is an incident for law enforcement to handle, we let them handle their procedures. And as it was, this person was taken into custody. Bloomfield Hills released a statement. He was charged. He was arraigned yesterday. There was an awful lot of activity on social media on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. The arraignment was posted on social media by I don't know who, but even the arraignment showed this man's demeanor. And I want to be careful. It wasn't a terrorism incident, but it terrified a lot of people. And why? Because the heightened awareness, the heightened incidence of all these things, and people know that people have perpetrated all kinds of domestic extremism as a result of their behavior.
And I want to talk about how we counter that as well, because this seems to be a rise. I mean, you have numbers, you track these things down. The question is, though, how do we counter the purveyors of the messages that declare anti-Semitism, racism, virulent racism, and white supremacy behavior?
So there's a few different things. So what happens in the difference between what somebody says online or freedom of speech versus when it starts moving towards hate speech, and that's where looking at tools like computers or cell phones and looking at the guidelines that are on digital platforms is really important, and making sure people understand what should be the codes of conduct. And ADL is not going to be the organization that tells people what to do, but ADL has been pretty forward in terms of our testimony before Congress and our complete loud public condemnation of platforms that don't have any digital guidelines. Let the platforms create digital guidelines for codes of conduct,
right,
and then follow them.
Yeah.
So there's that piece of it. Law enforcement has to get involved, and there are areas of the FBI, local law enforcement, and particularly the Michigan State Police that have entire units that are defined by watching what's going on and trying to connect the dots, so that a lot of bad things are thwarted, and a lot of times we don't even know about something because law enforcement has intercepted. So that's a part of it. This is a very complicated problem.
Yeah.
It also starts with people like you and influencers, politicians, community members saying, this is not acceptable. We must stand up to it. We must be allies for one another. When something happens in the black community, Jewish people should speak out. When something happens in the Jewish community, Asian community members must speak out. When something happens in the Asian community, the LGBTQ community must speak out, because this is a very concerted effort at looking at characteristics of people, and somehow in this country we have gotten to a point where people are being attacked.
Right.
And when one group isn't safe, no group is safe.
Yeah, you know, and I'm thinking even in terms of the Kanye West situation, how it's just diametrically opposed to the spirit of the Black Jewish Forum, the Black Jewish Coalition. The late Congressman John Lewis was an important player in that space. You know, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I mean, one of his closest allies was Rabbi Abraham, Yahshua Heschel, who marched with him in Selma and said, when I marched in Selma, my feet were praying. Dr. King received the award of the American Jewish Committee's highest award, the American Medallion Award in New York. I spoke at the American Jewish Committee. I was their speaker for their 2012 dinner. I feel like it goes against the spirit of that. Do you feel that the behavior of Kanye West and for some people is frightful? In fact, the dinner he had with former President Trump and the white supremacists, do you feel that it calls for rekindling a stronger Black Jewish coalition here?
Absolutely. And here in Michigan, we do have a coalition for Black and Jewish unity. ADL, the Urban League, we're involved in it. We work together. That coalition, for every Jewish partner, there's a Black partner. For every committee, that there's two partners. You know, the leadership is very, very connected. I think you make an excellent point. There is something it's incongruous to me. It's hard to understand that somebody who is a person of color would take somebody like Nick Fuentes to a dinner, Nick Fuentes being a complete Holocaust denier, and really kind of lift up the ideology that either the Holocaust didn't exist, when in fact Kanye West would have been targeted also. And then to come on Alex Jones and say the Nazis were right.
Yeah, Hitler was against black people. Hitler hated black people.
Hitler would not have, Kanye West would not have been, on Hitler's number one list. Let's just be honest about that.
Yeah.
So I think you make a tremendous point. This requires us to get back to the table, to get back to a time where people watched out for one another. This allyship must start happening in a stronger way.
All right, great. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Carolyn Normandin, she's the regional director for the Anti-Defamation League here in Michigan. We'll be right back with more on Sunday Nation. Stay with us. I'm Bankole Thompson.